I found the original notarized partnership agreement hidden inside a secret compartment of my 1952 Airstream's tufted vinyl banquette, and that single sheet of paper dismantled my half-sister's $870,000 betrayal piece by piece. Now, she sanitizes curling irons in a pink smock stitched with the words, "Curling Lies," while every appointment card in my mobile glamour studio prints the docket number of her fraud conviction. This is the story of how a quiet widow turned a trailer's hidden seam into an entire empire of second chances. I was 54 years old and 6 months widowed when the vultures landed. My husband Thomas was an architect who specialized in historic restorations, a man who could rebuild a century-old cornice from a single sepia photograph, and never, not once, raised his voice. He passed from a sudden brain aneurysm while inspecting roof joists on the sunroom he was building for me, leaving a silence so thick I could feel it pressing against my eardrums like a physical weight. 3 years before that, I had done something my financial advisor called catastrophically sentimental. I cashed out my entire $126,000,401K to buy a fleet of 6 derelict 1950s Airstream trailers from a dusty field in Kansas. That money represented every paycheck I'd set aside from my decades behind the styling chair, my union pension potential, all of it converted into aluminum shells and axle grease. My half-sister Vivienne, a celebrated bridal makeup artist with 60,000 Instagram followers in the luxury wedding circuit, had pitched me the idea over mimosas at her sprawling colonial, the kind with a 3-car garage and a kitchen island the size of a small parking space. A mobile vintage glamour studio where bridal parties would have their hair and makeup done inside rolling retro salons, each trailer themed to a different decade. She notarized a 50/50 share agreement at a UPS store on a wet Tuesday afternoon, promising me a lifetime of free updos for my 3 little granddaughters whenever they got married. And I believed her because she was family, and because she had a way of making you feel like you were the only person in the world who mattered when she turned on that high-beam smile. I had spent my career as a union hairstylist, so I knew my way around Marcel irons, pin curls, and the precise chemistry of old-fashioned perms. But I also learned to weld aluminum panels with a spool gun and rewire 12-volt systems because Thomas and I did every restoration together in our pole barn, him drafting structural modifications on onion skin paper with a mechanical pencil, me grinding corrosion off rivet lines while humming Patsy Cline. The first trailer we finished was a 1957 bubble, its shell polished to a mirror shine so absolute that birds sometimes flew into it. And when I stepped inside and smelled the fresh vinyl and barbicide, I felt an entire retirement spread out before me like a satin aisle runner. Thomas was the quiet architect behind our entire life. He used to say that the best load-bearing walls are the ones you never see. When he died, I discovered exactly how many walls he had built. The vultures circled before the grass on his grave had even settled. Vivienne and her husband, Ray, showed up at my door less than 24 hours after the funeral, before the neighbors' tuna casseroles had stopped arriving in foil pans. Ray was a real estate developer with the kind of slicked-back hair and golf course veneer that screamed midlife crisis leveraged on a balloon mortgage. He wore a blazer with gold buttons and smelled of cedar-scented deodorant, and he kept fiddling with his phone like he was closing deals while standing in my foyer. Vivienne wore a black silk wrap dress and dabbed a dry Kleenex at the corner of her eye as she hugged me and whispered, "We're going to take care of you now, sweetie. You shouldn't be alone in that big house with all these memories." Her breath smelled like expensive mints and the faintest trace of Chardonnay. Within 20 minutes, they were in my kitchen flipping through a folder of documents, crisp white sheets with colored tabs, explaining that the vintage trailer business had become too burdensome for a grieving widow and that they had a buyer already lined up. A national wedding planning franchise, Prestige Bridal Portfolios, wanted the branded fleet for an expansion into mobile services. The number they mentioned was $870,000, and Vivienne assured me I'd get a generous lump sum after they handled all the paperwork. She used words like liquidity event and strategic exit that sounded like they came from a YouTube business guru. I was so hollowed out by grief that I watched her glossy lips move and couldn't process a single syllable, but somewhere in the back of my skull, a tiny alarm bell rang. Thomas had always told me. If someone tries to give you a gift while you're bleeding, count your ribs. He said it after a contractor tried to overcharge us on drywall the month after his mother passed, and it had stuck like a burr. So I nodded, I blinked slowly, and I filed the whole exchange under revisit when the fog lifts. The next evening, after they left with their promises hanging in the air like cheap perfume, I wandered out to the pole barn, desperate to feel close to Thomas. The barn sat at the back of our property, a steel-sided structure with a concrete floor. Thomas had poured himself, the aggregate still bearing the faint ghost of his boot prints from the day he floated it. The air inside smelled of sawdust and aluminum polish and the faint ghost of his sandalwood aftershave, a scent that clung to his wool sweater and the collar of his drafting chair. Only one trailer remained on the property, a 1952 Flying Cloud that we had nearly finished before he got sick. The polished exterior gleamed under the fluorescent lights, its rows of rivets like tiny silver soldiers marching around the curve. But inside, the upholstery still held the sharp tang of old foam and fresh vinyl adhesive. The interior layout was a rear lounge with a curved dinette that converted to a bed, and the banquette on the opposite side was a long sofa covered in tufted vinyl the color of a robin's egg. Thomas had insisted on the diamond tufting himself, spending 3 weekends hand-stitching the French seams with waxed thread, because he said a vintage trailer had to have the right period details, or it was just a tin can. I lowered myself onto that curved banquette, the same spot where Thomas had sketched a tiny mechanical detail on a scrap of paper months ago. A discreet cubby for stowing hairspray cans behind the tufted backrest, accessible only if you knew exactly where to press. He had a mind like a Swiss watch, always building in a little extra function no one would ever see. I ran my fingers along the French-stitched seams, tracing the diamond tufts, and my thumbs snagged on something uneven. Not a tear, a barely perceptible ridge like a second layer of vinyl welted underneath. My stylist's eye for hidden detailing kicked in immediately, decades of training my fingers to detect a single crooked stitch in a silk hem. I fetched my seam ripper from my kit, the same worn wooden-handled one I had used to remove basting threads from thousands of bridal gowns, the blade slightly dulled, but still sharp enough to pick a thread without cutting the fabric beneath. I carefully separated the top stitching along one edge, working the tiny fork under each loop of thread and popping them one by one. The vinyl folded back with a soft crackle, revealing a recessed steel box, smaller than a shoe box, painted the exact same robin's egg blue as the trailer's interior. It had been welded into the aluminum framing with a neat bead of TIG weld, and Thomas had coated the edges with seam sealer to prevent moisture. The box had a simple friction latch with a tiny brass catch, not even locked. I lifted the lid with trembling fingers. Inside, I found 2 items: the original notarized partnership agreement, the physical document with my signature and Vivienne's, and the notary's embossed seal, thick and official, the notary's stamp raised and textured under my thumb, and a folded sheet of yellow legal pad paper in Thomas's handwriting, the letters slightly shaky because his hands had started to tremor in the last months from a pinched nerve he never complained about. The note read, "Do not trust them. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and she'll try to take everything. Save yourself. The trust file is in the safe deposit box at First Mercantile, key taped under the bottom drawer of my workshop tools. You'll know which drawer because it's the only one that sticks." I pressed the note to my chest until my breathing steadied, and then I did what any working-class woman with a mortgage and 2 broken hearts does. I put the document in my apron pocket and went back inside to play weak. The partnership agreement was dated 3 years back, the ink still dark, the notary stamp from a woman named Linda at the UPS store #4421, and I remembered that rainy Tuesday vividly because Vivienne had complained about her suede pumps getting wet. That memory, now retrofitted with the word betrayal, felt like a splinter under my skin. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that family betrayal cuts deeper than any stranger's crime. The next morning, I set the trap. Vivienne arrived alone, cradling a pink bakery box of gluten-free scones and a stack of what she called quick signature forms, her tone as sweet as fondant. She settled me on my own chintz couch like a fragile invalid, fluffing the pillows behind my head with the kind of theatrical tenderness that only a narcissist can muster. and explained that the sale to Prestige Bridal Portfolios was time-sensitive. The buyer's corporate counsel was breathing down their necks, and all I needed to do was sign an amendment transferring the fleet's titles to a newly formed LLC called Vive Ray Holdings, something Ray had set up just to simplify the tax structure. She set the forms on the coffee table, a 3-page document with a signature tab marked with a yellow sticky arrow. I glanced at the signature line and saw my own name, already filled in. The cursive had the familiar slant of my handwriting, the loop on the Y, and the cross on the T, exactly how I wrote them. But there was a faint tremor in the ink, a tiny wobble Vivienne had practiced from one of my old greeting cards. She had forged my consent. I felt a flush of heat climb my neck, a burning sensation that started at my clavicles and crept upward, but I forced every muscle in my face to slacken. My eyes went unfocused, the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had not slept in weeks, and I let my shoulders slump forward so my collarbones pressed against my blouse. I remembered how my mother used to say that the best lie is the one that looks like exhaustion. I let my voice go soft and slurry. "I'm so tired, Vive," I mumbled, drawing out the vowels. "Can I think about it for a day? My head is just full of cotton. I can't even find my reading glasses half the time." She pursed her lips, a flicker of irritation crossing her features before she smoothed it into a mask of sisterly concern. "Of course, sweetie. In fact, why don't you move into our guest house for a few weeks? I can't stand the thought of you out here all alone in this echoing house, and Ray can help you wrap up all these tedious little details. No pressure at all. We have a beautiful little casita with its own entrance, and you can use our kitchen whenever you like." The control tactic was transparent. Isolate me from my neighbors and my friends, monitor my every move, and apply a steady drip of pressure until I signed over my entire future under the guise of care. I agreed because I needed to be inside their home to find the rest of the proof, and also because I wanted to see how far they would go when they thought no one was watching. I gave her a weak smile and said, "You're so good to me, Vive. I don't know what I'd do without you." The words tasted like copper on my tongue, but she beamed and patted my hand as if I were a lapdog that had performed a trick. That afternoon, after Vivienne had left to prepare the guest suite, I went back to the pole barn one last time. Thomas's workshop tools stood against the far wall, a tall red craftsman rolling chest with about 14 drawers of varying sizes, each packed with precision screwdrivers, feeler gauges, rivet guns, and the little brass calipers he used to measure cornice detailing. The chest was vintage, from the 1970s, with chrome handles and friction slides that groaned when you pulled them. I knelt down on the cold concrete, my knees popping, and tried each drawer. The shallow top drawers slid easily, filled with sockets and Allen wrenches. The middle drawers held welding clamps and a digital angle finder. The bottom right one, a deep drawer meant for circular saw blades, stuck hard when I pulled. I jiggled it side to side, feeling the resistance of a slightly bent slide, and it gave with a reluctant screech. I reached underneath, ran my fingertips across the raw plywood bottom, and there it was. A small black safe deposit box key, taped with heavy-duty gaffer's tape that had aged to a brittle yellow. The key was a flat brass piece with a rounded head and First Mercantile, etched on one side in tiny block letters, the teeth cut in a simple pattern. I peeled it off and slipped it into my apron pocket next to the partnership agreement, feeling the weight of it like a promise. Then I packed a small suitcase with a few changes of clothes, sensible cotton underwear and cardigans, my styling shears in a leather roll, a vintage lockpicking set disguised as a sewing kit that I had assembled while restoring old trailer door mechanisms, a tension wrench made from a street sweeper bristle, a small diamond pick ground from a hacksaw blade, and 2 rakes of different profiles, all nestled between spools of thread, and my late husband's digital fluke multimeter for probing odd electrical work. I also included a small notebook, a stub of carpenter's pencil, and a pair of nitrile gloves. The guest house was a converted pool cabana with French doors that looked directly into their kitchen windows, which meant I could observe their routines like a birdwatcher with a grudge. The first night I lay awake in that guest house, I listened to the hum of their air conditioner and the distant clink of wine glasses, and I began to catalog. Within 2 days of moving in, I started seeing the financial red flags pile up like dirty dishes. Ray took frantic phone calls in the garden, pacing back and forth in his monogrammed slippers on the flagstone patio, the morning sprinklers ticking in the background. I stood behind the sheer curtain, my ear pressed to the glass, cataloging every word. He would hiss into the phone. Marco said the offshore hold is pending until the title clears. And we can't liquidate the Cayman account without the trust instrument. That trust is the linchpin. He mentioned something called an irrevocable beneficiary designation and cursed when the signal dropped. Vivienne made a trip to the Lexus dealership and came home in a brand new pearl-white RX with a big silver bow on the hood, telling me it was a lease special with payments so low they were practically giving it away. I nodded and said it was beautiful, but I noticed the temporary registration in the glove box listed the buyer as Vive Ray Holdings LLC, not a lease. She also started ordering furniture online at midnight, antique French armoires, and crystal chandeliers that cost more than my first trailer, her phone's screen brightness illuminating her smug face in the dark kitchen while I pretended to sleep. The delivery trucks came in the early morning, and she'd sign for them in a silk robe, directing the men to stack the boxes in the climate-controlled garage. I overheard her complaining to Ray that the buyer's corporate counsel, a woman named M.S. Goldstein, kept requesting the original notarized partnership document because the title search had flagged two conflicting ownership records. Vivienne's voice went sharp and nasal. "We'll just produce a notarized lost document affidavit. I can forge anything, Ray. I've done it before. I'll sign a statement saying the original was destroyed in a move. Goldstein can chew on that." Ray replied in a low rumble, "Make sure the notary is on our side, not one of those sticklers." That sent a spike of cold adrenaline through my veins. They were going to paper over my very existence, and then, if the conservatorship went through, lock me away in some facility while they cashed the check. I wrote down every phrase I heard in my tiny notebook, using the carpenter's pencil because it left a dark, erasable mark. The turning point came on a sweltering Thursday afternoon, when a galvanized water pipe in the main house's bathroom wall burst with a sound like a shotgun blast, and water started spraying across Ray's imported travertine floors. Vivienne shrieked and ran in circles, her silk caftan billowing like a sail, while Ray yelled about the $1,000 marble thresholds in the hallway. The water spread in a dark fan across the pale stone, soaking their Turkish runner and dripping into the laundry room one floor down. I walked into the utility room, calm as a pond on a windless day, knelt down in my sensible cotton trousers, and turned the main water shut-off valve with a single quarter turn of the brass lever. The spraying stopped instantly, leaving a dripping silence. I looked at them both and said, "Do you have a pipe cutter and a torch?" They stared at me like I had spoken in hieroglyphics. Ray stuttered something about calling an emergency plumber, already dialing a number on his phone, but I was already heading to my truck. I retrieved my soldering kit from the lockbox, a carryover from the trailer restorations, a Burnsomatic map gas torch with a built-in striker, a rigid mini tubing cutter with a chrome finish, emery cloth in 120 grit, a stick of lead-free silver solder, a little tin of OD flux with a brush built into the cap, and a tube of sandpaper for deburring. I also grabbed a spare half-inch copper coupling and a short length of Typel copper pipe, because I knew the existing pipe might be too thin once I cut out the burst section. Back inside, I laid down an old drop cloth, set up a work light, and assessed the damage. The pipe had corroded at a T-joint where hot and cold met, the zinc coating eaten away by years of electrolysis. I measured the distance between the remaining straight sections with a tape, marked the cut lines with a Sharpie, and scored the copper with the tubing cutter. A half-turn, tighten, half-turn, tighten, until the blade bit through with a clean pop. I deburred the inside of the cut ends with the reamer attachment until the edge was smooth as glass, then scrubbed the outside with emery cloth until the copper gleamed like a new penny. I brushed flux onto both surfaces, the paste turning a translucent yellow, and I dry-fit the coupling and the patch pipe to ensure everything seated flush. Then I lit the torch, adjusting the flame to a soft blue cone with a feather of orange, and began heating the joint evenly, moving the torch in a circular motion. When the flux started to sizzle and turn clear, I touched the solder to the seam and watched the molten silver wick into the joint with capillary action, forming a perfect shiny ring. I wiped the excess with a damp rag, and the joint hardened in seconds. I did the second joint the same way, my hands steady from years of practice on trailer plumbing, where every inch mattered and a leak could warp the birch interior. Within 45 minutes, I had the water back on, pressure steady at 55 psi on the gauge I'd attached, and no drips. Ray clapped me on the shoulder, calling me a hidden gem, and Vivienne poured me a glass of Prosecco, her relief tinged with a kind of greedy admiration, like she was mentally inventorying my usefulness. That moment of competence gave me the exact freedom I needed. While they celebrated their averted disaster with clinking glasses in the living room, I slipped down the hallway into Ray's home office. The air inside smelled of leather and toner cartridges. The filing cabinet next to his desk was a 4-drawer Han lateral in putty gray, the kind with a central lock bar that secures all drawers at once. The lock was a basic wafer type, a 5-wafer stack with no security pins, exactly the sort you find on 100 million office cabinets. I had dealt with dozens of these on vintage trailers where owners lost their keys decades ago, and I knew that the wafer lock on a Han cabinet could be raked open with a simple rocking motion. From my sewing kit, I selected the tension wrench and a small half-diamond pick. I inserted the tension wrench into the bottom of the keyway, applying a whisper of rotational pressure with my left thumb, just enough to bind the wafers but not so much that they seized. I slid the pick to the back of the lock and began raking the tumblers in a smooth, controlled pull, dragging the diamond over the wafer edges. The first wafer set with a soft click, a tiny vibration through the pick handle. I reset the pick, eased off the tension a fraction, and raked again. Click, click. The third wafer was sticky. I had to jiggle the pick in a figure-8 pattern to loosen it. Click. The fourth set immediately. The fifth I overset and had to release tension entirely, letting the wafers spring back, then start over with even lighter pressure. On the second pass, click, and the plug turned smoothly. In under 2 minutes, the drawer slid open on silent ball-bearing rollers. Inside, I found a hanging folder labeled Airstream Sale, tabbed in red, neatly organized and brimming with criminal intent. The folder contained the forged transfer document, a detailed blueprint of my signature with tracing paper, overlays where Vivienne had practiced the exact slant and pressure of my cursive, right down to the tiny hook on the tail of my Y. She had used a light box. I could see the pinprick marks where she'd traced from an original greeting card. There was a photocopy of a cashier's check for $870,000 made out to Vive Ray Holdings, LLC, a Nevada shell company registered the week after Thomas's obituary ran in the local paper. The registered agent addressed a strip mall storefront in Carson City. Stapled to that was a printout of an email from Ray to the registered agent service, instructing them to list Vivienne as the sole managing member and to keep the operating agreement streamlined. But the most damning item was a crisp manila folder containing a document from a probate attorney named Cullen Strathmore of Strathmore and Lee, LLP. A draft petition for temporary conservatorship over my person and estate, citing early cognitive decline and severe grief-induced incapacity. It included an attached fake medical affidavit, not yet signed, from a doctor, Marcus Welby, a name so cliched it made my teeth ache, alleging I displayed signs of Alzheimer's and could no longer manage my own finances or make informed decisions. The affidavit described me as confused about basic financial concepts, prone to wandering, and emotionally unstable. It was a complete fabrication, and I recognized the phrasing from a Google search for early dementia symptoms that I'd later discover Vivienne had run on her laptop. My own half-sister was planning to have me declared legally incompetent so she could finish the theft without a single objection. I felt an acid taste rise in the back of my throat, and my hands steadied in the way they do when you finally see the enemy clearly. I carefully photographed every page with my phone, making sure to capture the letterhead phone numbers and the blank signature lines, front and back. Then I reassembled the folder exactly as I'd found it, sliding the hanging tab back into its notch, and I wiped the drawer handles and the lock face with a microfiber cloth from my pocket to eliminate any smudges, using a plastic card to reset the lock without leaving a trace. I slipped back out, and they never noticed I had been gone. They were still laughing about the pipe in the living room, Ray saying something about how the old bird still has some tricks. That night, I sat in the dark of the guest house and reconstructed the entire fraudulent timeline. Using a spreadsheet on my tablet, I cross-referenced the dates on the forged documents with Thomas's meticulous work logs, which I still had stored in a binder. The The pattern emerged like a photograph developing in a chemical bath. The Shelvive Ray Holdings LLC had been filed with the Nevada Secretary of State on October 17, exactly 7 days after Thomas's obituary ran on October 10. The conservatorship petition draft bore a creation date of November 2, the same week Vivienne brought me that first sympathy lasagna. The signature tracing overlays were dated October 25, meaning she'd started practicing my handwriting while I was still making burial arrangements. I cross-checked phone numbers on the forged documents with call logs I'd glimpsed on Ray's desk, matching the escrow officer's direct line. I now had enough to sync them, but I needed the legal nuclear option Thomas had left for me. 2 mornings later, I told Vivienne I had a routine medical checkup at the clinic downtown. She barely looked up from her phone, which was displaying a Pinterest board for Tuscan kitchen renovations. I drove to First Mercantile, a solid limestone building with brass fixtures on Elm Street, the kind of bank that still has a vault with a massive round door painted in green enamel and a plaque from 1922. The lobby smelled of floor wax and old money. I approached the safe deposit desk with my identification and the small black key, my heart thudding in my ears. The bank officer, a young woman with a nameplate reading, Claire, verified my signature and led me to the vault. The vault was a cathedral of polished steel boxes stacked floor to ceiling, the air refrigerated and humming with a quiet dehumidifier. She inserted her guard key into one side of door 2237. I inserted mine into the other, and the lock turned with a heavy, satisfying clunk. She slid the long metal box out on a silent rail and pointed me to a private viewing cubicle. I closed the door, sat on the wooden stool, and opened the box. Inside, I found Thomas's trust file, a thick manila envelope sealed with a red string and a wax imprint of his signet ring, and a separate letter addressed to me in his handwriting. I opened the letter first, my fingers trembling so badly I had to press them flat on the laminate table. It read, "My love, if you are reading this, I want you to know I saw the serpent in the garden before I even had the words for it. Vivienne's smile never reached her eyes when she looked at your work. She would compliment your perms while her gaze slid sideways, inventorying the cost. So I built a wall you can't see. Inside this envelope is a revocable living trust with a springing co-trustee provision. It holds the original vehicle titles and the partnership instruments you and I notarized, plus a survivorship clause I tailored. If any asset is ever transferred or encumbered without a notarized dual signature form bearing both your signature and the co-trustees, the trust automatically reverts every single share to a designated survivor trust in your name alone. It requires a federal court order to undo. The co-trustee is Alina Harrow, the trust officer at First Mercantile, extension 4402. She has been like a pit bull in a cardigan for our family since before you and I met. The trust is funded with a $1 bill and recorded in the county clerk's office, so it's ironclad. Go to her. She already knows. Save yourself and know that I loved you with every blueprint I ever drew. P.S. The trust also covers the house, free and clear. I paid off the mortgage last year with the asbestos settlement from that old factory case. Another wall you didn't see. I sat in that little cubicle and cried for about 3 minutes, the kind of hard, silent tears that feel like they're scrubbing your bones clean. Then I blotted my eyes with a handkerchief from my purse, tucked the trust documents into my bag, and walked upstairs to ask for Alina Harrow. Alina was a sharp-eyed woman in her late 60s, with silver hair twisted into a neat chignon and glasses on a chain. Her office had a window overlooking a courtyard with a fountain, and the desk was cluttered with trust binders and a small brass nameplate. She listened without interrupting, her hands folded on her desk blotter, while I laid out the photographs of the forged documents, the conservatorship petition, and the original partnership agreement. Her face turned to granite, the sort of expression that says, "I have seen the worst of humanity, and I am not surprised, just disappointed." She confirmed that the $870,000 sale was voidable ab initio, meaning from the start, because the title chain was broken. She then pulled up the Prestige Bridal Portfolio's escrow file on her computer and told me that the earnest money deposit of $87,000 was already sitting in a trust account, contingent on a clean title transfer. She made a phone call to the bank's general counsel, a man named Mr. Abernathy, and within 10 minutes they had drafted a hold letter freezing all further disbursements pending a fraud investigation. Then she leaned forward and said, We need one more piece of incontrovertible evidence that they are actively exploiting you, something that shows malice and not just greed. A jury needs to feel the coldness of it. Do you have any way to capture that? I told her I had an idea, and I described the medical scare I planned to stage. Elinor's lips pressed into a thin, approving line. She gave me a small digital audio recorder disguised as a flash drive, a Sony ICDPX series that activated with a slide switch and captured uncompressed WAV audio. She also arranged for MS Goldstein, the buyer's corporate counsel, to attend the final signing at the bank 4 days later, under the pretense that the escrow company needed an in-person verification due to regulatory compliance. That signing would be the stage. I staged the medical emergency 3 days later, on a Saturday afternoon, when Ray was in the middle of a conference call with the escrow officer and Vivienne was perched at the kitchen island, filling out a lost document affidavit with her practiced forgery. The sun hammered through the sliding glass doors, making the travertine floor glow. I positioned myself in the sunroom, directly in view of the glass doors, and rehearsed the collapse in my mind. I needed it to look real but not fatal, enough to trigger their response. I activated the digital recorder in my apron pocket, the same heavy canvas apron I had worn while welding trailer frames, its thick fabric muffling the rustle but not the voices. I double-checked that the red recording light was glowing through the fabric. Then I crumpled to the tile floor with a loud, jarring thud, the kind of full-body impact that bruises the hip. I clutched my chest with both hands, knuckles whitening, my face contorted in what I hoped looked like a sudden cardiac event, jaw slack, eyes wide and unfocused. I gasped and wheezed, short staccato breaths like a fish on a dock, one hand clawing at the hem of the antique rug and pulling it askew. I made my body jerk in arrhythmic spasms, kicking my left leg against a potted plant and knocking over a ceramic pot with a clatter. I kept my eyes slitted open. Vivienne glanced through the doorway, her phone still pinned between her ear and her shoulder. She was on a conference call. I could hear her say, "The signature is perfectly notarized. I'm looking at it right now." And then our eyes met for one split second. I saw nothing in her expression except a flicker of annoyance, the kind you might give a fly that has landed on your dessert. She stepped over my body, not around it. Her high heel, a nude patent leather pump with a red sole, grazed my outstretched forearm with a sharp pressure and left a faint red line that later blossomed into a bruise the size of a quarter. She snatched the forged signature page off the sideboard next to the door, and into the phone she said, even as I lay there gasping and choking, "Ignore that, she's just being dramatic. The signature is valid. I've got the wet ink right here. No, she's always been fragile. Ever since Thomas died, she's been having these little episodes. I'll have Ray check on her in a minute, but let's finish this before the courier cut off." She never even paused her call to dial 911. I heard Ray shout from the next room over the speakerphone, "Is she dead?" And Vivienne replied, without a single tremor of emotion, "Not yet, but the paperwork is." The words hung in the air like a bell struck too hard. I lay there for 3 more minutes, breathing in shallow little sips, counting the seconds, while my sister ignored my life for a signature. Then, when they both retreated to the kitchen to clink glasses over their triumph, I heard the pop of a Prosecco cork and Vivienne's laugh, high and brittle. I rose quietly, my hip aching, walked to the guest house and transferred the audio file to my tablet. The file, time-stamped, uncompressed, and crystal clear, captured every word. I emailed it to Elinor Harrow with the subject line, "Malice." Her response came within the hour. "I have forwarded this to Agent Derek Voss of the FBI's Elder Fraud Task Force. He will meet us at the bank." Time to close the trap. The final confrontation took place at the very bank branch where I had deposited my hairdressing paychecks for 30 years. The marble counters now polished to a liquid gleam that reflected the brass chandeliers overhead. Vivienne and Ray dressed me in a pressed blazer they had bought that morning, the tags still tucked into the sleeve, and drove me downtown chattering about how this was the first day of my carefree retirement. Ray patted my knee from the passenger seat and said, "You're going to thank us in a year, just wait. We'll get you a nice condo near the golf course." Vivienne hummed along to a soft rock station, her fingers tapping the steering wheel of the new Lexus, and she had the gall to squeeze my hand and say, "I'm so proud of you for being brave about all this, sweetie. Thomas would be so pleased." The words hit like a slap, but I kept my face blank, a placid mask of compliance. The conference room at the bank was on the second floor, a secure space with frosted glass windows and a long walnut table polished to a mirror's shine. A notary public sat in the corner with her stamp and journal, a plump woman named Mrs. Chen, who had notarized our original partnership and whom Vivienne had, unfortunately for her, specifically requested. Eleanor Harrow was positioned to the side as my financial advisor, wearing a gray suit and a string of pearls that looked like they could withstand a nuclear blast. The buyer's corporate counsel, M.S. Goldstein, had flown in from Chicago with a briefcase full of escrow instructions and a sharp-eyed paralegal who took notes on a yellow legal pad. Agent Derek Voss, a tall man with a crew cut and a charcoal suit, sat in the hallway pretending to review documents, his badge visible on his belt when he shifted. Vivienne slid the stack of closing documents toward me with a glittering smile, a pen laid neatly on top. "Just sign here, and initial there, and we're all done, sweetie," she cooed, pointing with a manicured nail at the yellow signature flags. The document was a bill of sale and assignment, about 12 pages, with a notary acknowledgement at the end. I picked up the pen, a heavy Montblanc that Ray must have bought for the occasion, and held it aloft, watching the fluorescent light catch the ballpoint tip. The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Then I set the pen down with a soft click and opened my purse. I removed the original notarized partnership agreement, crisp and official, and laid it on the walnut surface with a sound like a playing card on felt. I said, very calmly, my voice steady as a metronome, "I will not sign a single line. This document proves that Vivienne forged my signature, that she and her husband created a shell company to steal a business I built with my own hands and my late husband's life savings. The sale you've been negotiating, M.S. Goldstein, is based on a fraudulent title. I have video, audio, and a draft conservatorship petition proving they intended to have me declared incompetent. Every dollar of that $870,000 is about to be frozen, and I have here the original trust instrument that voids any transfer signed without my explicit notarized consent. The trust is held here, at this bank, under the co-trusteeship of M.S. Harrow." M.S. Goldstein's eyes went wide, and she reached for the partnership agreement with a lawyer's careful fingers, turning it over to examine the notary seal. She then looked at the forged signature page and back at the original, and her expression shifted from confusion to fury. Ray lunged forward, his face florid with shock, his chair scraping backward, but Eleanor was faster. She pressed a discreet button under the table rim, a silent alarm that she'd had installed for high-stakes signings. The conference room door opened, and Agent Voss entered with another plainclothes agent, a woman with a tight ponytail, badges now hanging from their necks. A third uniformed security officer blocked the hallway door. Agent Voss said, "Vivienne and Raymond Kellerman, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, forgery, and attempted elder abuse. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The words were crisp and procedural, the same Miranda warning I'd heard 1,000 times on cop shows but never felt so heavy. Vivienne staggered back, knocking over a carafe of water, and hissed at me, "You vindictive old hag, after everything I did for you." I looked at her, dry-eyed for the first time in months, and said, "You thought you could steal my retirement and my husband's memory, but the only thing you built was a cage for yourself." That single line, quiet and even, was the most satisfying sound I have ever made. Ray started babbling about his lawyer, but Agent Voss put him in cuffs with a practiced motion, patting him down and removing his phone. The aftermath unspooled with the kind of bureaucratic precision that Thomas would have admired, every form filed in triplicate, every asset accounted for on a spreadsheet. Vivienne was convicted of forgery, elder fraud, and conspiracy, and she received a 4-year sentence in a federal facility in West Virginia, a minimum security camp where she now teaches a makeup techniques class that, I've heard, has a long waiting list. Ray got 6 years for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy, and his developer's license was permanently revoked by the state real estate board. Their ill-gotten assets were seized through civil forfeiture. The Lexus was auctioned off, the half-finished condo in Grand Cayman was liquidated and returned to the escrow fund, and the $237,000 they'd stashed in an offshore account under a bearer share corporation was repatriated and turned over to the fraud restitution pool. The Airstream fleet was returned to me free and clear, every polished rivet accounted for, and I spent a weekend reinventorying each trailer with a clipboard, checking the VIN plates against the trust documents. Prestige bridal portfolios, now fully aware of the story's viral potential after a local news station, ran a segment called The Trailer Betrayal, renegotiated a licensing deal worth $2 million. The deal included a mini-documentary for their YouTube channel, a dedicated booking portal that integrated with my scheduling software, and a revenue share on every mobile bridal package that used my trailers. They also agreed to fund a scholarship for single mothers entering the cosmetology trade, named after Thomas. But I didn't stop there. I renamed the business Trailer of Betrayal Glam, leaning into the narrative with a wink that made my granddaughters giggle every time they saw the logo. Each trailer got a custom embroidered throw pillow that told a snippet of the saga. One read, The Banquet Discovery. Another, The Forged Signature Caper. I hired a web designer to create an appointment booking system that prints every confirmation card with a small QR code linking directly to the federal fraud docket's public records on Pacer, so every bride and bridesmaid could read the full indictment while waiting for their updo. The first trailer you see when you walk up, the 1956 Sovereign, has a little brass plaque by the door that reads, "This business was almost stolen, but truth loves aluminum." The most poetic piece of restitution arrived through the probation arrangement. As part of her supervised release after 14 months, Vivienne was required to perform 2,000 hours of community service. I petitioned the court for a victim restitution employment order, providing the judge with a detailed proposal that included a training manual, a code of conduct, and a list of duties that would not involve direct contact with clients or handling of money. The judge, a stern woman named Judge Reyes, approved it with a note that said restorative justice at its finest. So now, 4 days a week, Vivienne clocks in at the flagship trailer, the same 1956 Sovereign retrofitted into a shampoo and set station, wearing a pink smock I had custom embroidered at a local shop on a Burnham machine, the thread a heavy cotton in contrasting navy. In elegant cursive script across the chest, it reads, "Curling Lies." Underneath, in smaller blue thread, the federal fraud docket number from the Pacer system is stitched permanently, a little string of digits and letters that cannot be cut out without destroying the smock. Her job is to sanitize curling irons with barbicide, sweep up hair clippings from the linoleum floor, restock bobby pins into the little glass jars, and scrub shampoo bowls with a gentle abrasive while customers sip mimosas in vintage glassware and ask me about the smock. I always tell them the truth, and Vivienne has to listen, her face a mask of forced neutrality. My granddaughters still get their free-up DOS, but never from her. At the first wedding they attended after the trial, my eldest granddaughter had her victory rolls set by my own hands, while I intertwined tiny sprigs of baby's breath into the dark curls. In the background, through the trailer's curved window, I could see Vivienne on her knees wiping down a baseboard with a microfiber rag, her smock visible as a pink blur. That moment felt less like revenge and more like the natural order of justice clicking back into alignment, a gear that had slipped and was now turning smoothly again. Thomas's note is framed in my bedroom now, the yellow legal paper, the shaky pencil, the phrase, "Save yourself," underlined twice. He had known that family isn't defined by shared DNA, but by the quiet vigilance of someone who builds secrets into the upholstery to protect you long after he's gone. Integrity isn't about blood. It's about choice. It's about the people who don't step over your body to grab a contract, about the ones who hide a steel box behind the vinyl because they believe you're worth the extra hour of stitching. I wake up every morning, walk through a fleet of gleaming aluminum trailers that catch the sunrise and throw rainbows of reflected light across the gravel, and remember that I was almost buried under someone else's greed. Now I'm driving a rolling courtroom on wheels, and every ticket sold helps fund beauty school scholarships for single mothers who need a fresh start. Sometimes the best way to honor the dead is to turn their warning into a business plan that gives other women the tools to stand on their own 2 feet. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments, because I read them, and your stories remind me that truth has a way of surfacing like a hidden seam in an old banquet. If you believe in second chances earned through hard work and a good lockpick, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more real-life betrayals with surprisingly satisfying endings. Until next time, stay sharp.